I'm Paul. Sorry. This is episode 192 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Good to see you again, Wally.
Good to see you, Paul. We're in a time where it seems like every week is a year in terms of developments out there.
Yeah, we have plenty to talk about, but I'm gonna talk about my hair right now. I do have hair on some parts of my head, although I'm missing it on others. But this lovely haircut was courtesy of my wife, Krista, who I was getting a little shaggy, and it actually does at times. And we ordered some trimmers online, and my wife gave me a haircut over the weekend. So it's better. It feels better. I don't care how it looks. It just feels better.
Yes, self-sufficiency. So yeah, I am the recipient of a little trim, and with the exception of a couple notches, things are going okay. I have this as an example. I'm not sure if you can see it, but my wife did send me a video of a guy who did not fare as well as we did with the home haircuts. So anyway.
Yes, it's nice to be a guy because I know my wife would love to go to the hairstylist, the salon right now. And, her hair is infinitely more complicated than mine. And I'm sure your lovely wife's is as well. They are not going to rely upon us for a coloring or a highlighting of said hair, let alone cutting it. And it is one of those things that we're all seeing through this whole virus situation. And who knows when the hairstylists and hair salons will be available once again.
Yes, hopefully soon.
But, we're jumping right in here to the news of the week. And there's a lot going on. And the Rio Grande Foundation, of course, is always front and center in New Mexico public policy discussions. We coordinated in a coalition effort with our friends at Progress Now, at Power the Future. It begins with P. Power the Future, which is run by Larry Behrens, who's been a podcast guest in the past. We came up with a website called Fairly Open. Fairlyopen.com is really about fairly opening New Mexico, but the website is simply Fairly Open, which we were really excited to get that web address. You can find a petition to sign, and the idea is not that we are going to try to pressure the governor per se to open up. That is kind of, it goes without saying, but we are going to pressure her. And this was made before the announcement on the 15th, but the idea is to fairly and openly open New Mexico, because we don't believe that the governor has held, for example, small businesses to the same standards applied to big box stores. She's not come up with a detailed plan, and including health criteria, to figure out what businesses could open and how they should open, and provided that as a public document so that you can, when you have a health inspection of a restaurant, they know the 5 or 10 most important things that they're looking for, and the restaurant knows that they have to comply to this standard. In this current situation, it is literally a diktat coming out from Santa Fe saying, you're open, you're not open. And the rhyme or reason just doesn't seem to be there. So we're going to start with that. There's a few more other parts of fairlyopen.com I'd like to get to, but I do want to give you a chance to kind of weigh in and share some of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it strikes me that in New Mexico, we have been focusing on flattening the curve. And depending on who you talk to, we should still be doing that. And, at some level, I tend to agree with that. But you can't just do one thing at a time. There will come a time when things will open up, or literally it won't be hard to discern that the cure is worse than the disease with regard to how we're managing our economy in these times of COVID-19. So Sometimes the war metaphor, it's a war against the virus. Well, guess what? You need to do more than one thing in war. You have a battle before you, but there are many battles going forward. And in this case, it's opening up the economy. And it does seem like we've been in New Mexico, we've been seeing a hyper focus on the virus, but not all the other things that just seem like they're falling by the wayside and crumbling, whether it be the rural health situation with hospitals suffering tremendously. As you alluded to, the disparity between how the big box stores have been treated relative to how small businesses have been treated. And these are things that will need to be addressed. And the time to address them and to start to address them is now, not whatever 2 4 6 weeks when quote unquote things can open back up.
Yeah, and back to the haircutting thing, that is going to be a challenging process because you need two people coming into close proximity who are pretty much strangers, aside from your wife cutting your hair, my wife cutting my hair. Simple logistics say that there's going to be a certain amount of closer proximity, but there are other businesses that have been closed that require virtually no proximity. And we actually posted a story over at heirsofenchantment.com by a Madeline Jones who owns a bridal dress store. Now, I don't know, I've been married a long time, so have you. So we're not in the process of trying to plan a wedding, and I can only imagine what a mess that whole situation must be. But one would think that it would be a pretty straightforward process to take an already tailored dress and bridesmaids dresses and the whole 9 yards, so to speak, and transfer them somehow to a customer who has already paid for that particular item. She writes at Heirs of Enchantment in more detail, but that's a pretty, there's layups and then there's 3-point shots in this whole situation. Haircuts are kind of a 3-point shot. They're a little tougher. This is a layup. You should be able to accommodate the transfer of a dress or dresses from one person to another. It doesn't seem to be that difficult.
Yeah, you much like the situation where restaurants, those without drive-ins, you can do takeout where you can go and some of them you can go into. Others they're like, call when we're here, we'll bring it out to you. So there's curbside service for places that don't have drive-throughs and certainly never thought they were going to be in the takeout business as their primary business. But that strikes me as one of those, yes, can easily be done. A minimum of interaction, a minimum of people involved, even relative to things that are open and operating every day.
Yeah, no doubt. And, back to fairlyopen.com, we want to see the models that the administration, Lujan Grisham administration, is using to base their decisions upon, because she's extended the deadline now to May the 15th. The quarantine is on until mid-May. Right now, as we record this in the waning days of April, there's a lot of pushback from mayors across the state. We saw it in Farmington. The Grants mayor of Grants, has really picked up the torch and been more aggressive, and quite frankly is setting up for a very interesting I hate to say the term showdown.
Yeah, there is. The showdown is the term that came to mind for me.
Yeah, and we all hope it's in this time of virtual technology, a virtual showdown, a more government powers oriented showdown.
But Twitter war, if nothing else.
When you have state, armed state agents, state police, and armed agents of the local government, the Grants police, told to do exact opposite things and to treat the law very differently. I mean, certainly the potential for some kind of confrontation comes into play, and we don't want to see that. But I just, one of the aspects of this whole shutdown that we've seen and Fairly Open is trying to alleviate is that we have a law in place, thanks to passage of this in 2003, where, for lack of a better term, the governor is a dictator in New Mexico.
In times of crisis.
In real time. And right. She doesn't have a deadline by which she has to get approval from the legislature or hand over control when the crisis is gone. She gets to essentially keep this crisis footing for as long as she feels is appropriate. And that's a very dubious and questionable way to do things. So what we're trying to do is get, the openness in the process, because if somebody, one person, makes all these very important decisions, life or death for a lot of businesses, and not to mention people, you really hope that they're being based on sound science, sound legal principles, and really a good analysis of the situation. I think that a lot of the frustration, yes, I understand a lot of it's coming from more conservative, libertarian, free market people. I think that's just a fact that those people look at the economy in maybe a more clear-eyed manner than a lot of people on the left. But it's not about politics for we at the Rio Grande Foundation, for folks at Power the Future. There's a lot of well grounded concerns coming to the fore. I mean, the Grants mayor, I can't imagine he's a Republican. Let's put it that way. It's obviously a bipartisan deal. Grants is not considered Republican stronghold there in Cibola
No,
County.
far from it.
So,
yes. So we will have to see, but boy, as these things go forward, there is incredible pressure on those that have lost their job, waiting for their unemployment checks that sometimes seem to be just lost in the system.
mm-hmm.
And small business people, except those, I've actually heard of some small businesses that were doing pretty well, quote unquote. They're like, oh no, just go as long as you want. Well, come to find out, most of those were businesses that great amounts of wealth were made in other industries, and they came and they got into a small business in New Mexico. The ones that started their own small business from scratch in New Mexico, they're in a way different situation, and as are their employees. And so there's a lot of pressure here. It goes without saying, but man, these are tough decisions. But it does seem like we've been focused on the virus in and of itself as the only thing that gets attention, at least in the media, at least from state government. And we know that that's important. And, it's one of those, I won't say it anymore because I do believe it goes without saying, but there are other things that are very important today and will just continue to be important for the next number of weeks, months, and years that we probably had to get started on.
Yeah, and San Diego's restaurant at the base of the tram, that one announced that it's both shutting down and not reopening. We know about the Cooperage having already shut down. The number of restaurants and businesses that will not survive this is going to be long and undoubtedly getting longer. I think a lot of them are probably just hoping they can wait things out. But even after May 15th, it's going to be a very slow process. Now, a couple of things worth acknowledging. One is that the Albuquerque Journal, and you can take or not take op-eds or editorials, I should say, with whatever authority you want. But the Albuquerque Journal tends to be more centrist and even slightly to the conservative side. But their editorial on Saturday, first and foremost, both of them were great. But the first one on Saturday was reality will blow away Albuquerque and Bernalillo County fairy tale budgets. I love that term. And I think we specifically at the Rio Grande Foundation came out and questioned Bernalillo County's budget just in the last week's podcast episode, saying we're going to have 7% budget growth. But certainly the city of Albuquerque has been slow to do anything different relating to this particular crisis, whereas other cities like Rio Rancho are starting to be somewhat proactive. Unfortunately, it involves furloughing and cutting and doing all the things that liberal leaders especially, but political leaders in general don't love that. But especially, Tim Keller seems to be very reticent to want to embrace budgetary reality, as has the governor.
She hasn't even talked about it, and I do think I've heard there's people who have the sense that the feds can bail out everything. They cannot.
No.
They can make certain things less painful. They will still be painful, but they're, you know, I was reading a thing the other day about, well, where are we in terms of the fiscal capacity of the federal government? You know, we're at 25 trillion, give or take. You know, what's a couple trillion a
Right
month
now,
spent?
but it's on
Right
its
this
way
sec-
high up.
It's
Yeah.
on its way higher. So the point of that is that where are we in terms of where things get to be bad, uh, like the Venezuela and other places that have had issues. So under the most conservative assumptions, we've got to be 25% of the way there. 100 trillion. Let's just say that in my, just the kind of analysis I went over, 100 trillion is probably 95% economic collapse for the United States. So are we 25% of the way there? Maybe, but we could be 50% of the way there. You know, we could be 60, 70%. It could be 35, 45, 50 trillion, and then things really start to go away, because the problem with that 25 trillion number is it doesn't include Social Security. They always conveniently set that aside, and you know, people aren't working; they're putting money into Social Security, but they're going to keep getting older, and at some point take money out of that system. So we have some huge issues. So the point of it is if we think that the feds are going to be like your kindly old great grandmother in my reality, where she would give us, and this was in the 70s, so a dollar was worth more, but she'd give us like $5 for our birthday. Okay, so can the federal government be that kindly old grandmother to state and local government? Probably. Are they going to be like Daddy Warbucks, the rich uncle that's going to give you 50 grand for your birthday when you're 18 years old? I sort of doubt it. And to act otherwise, you just have to say, what is the strategy in terms of making things much worse? And maybe they're working at it feverishly and they don't want to let out their work product in the meantime, but they're acting like there isn't a problem or it's going to be solved by itself. And it doesn't seem like that's a safe assumption, at least at this point.
No doubt about it. And we've got to get going on plans to address the inevitable budgetary and fiscal challenges facing our state. As I've said, I think you can say we're New Mexico and we come to the federal government and we say, Uncle Sam,
rich Uncle Sam,
rich Uncle Sam, who happens to be driving the Mercedes, but is in hock up to his eyeballs.
Yeah, the least Mercedes.
Yeah. We really need some help. And we could come and say, well, we need, just say $5 billion as a state. That would be like, everything works out great for New Mexico. We don't have to cut anything. We don't have to really do anything. I'm picking that number literally out of the air. But you can only blame the coronavirus itself for maybe half of that entire $5 billion at this point. Whatever amount the shortfall is, the fact staring us right in the face, as we've repeatedly discussed, but it bears repeating again, is that even if you threw the coronavirus out, now I know it's impacted oil and gas prices, but if you just take that out of the equation, oil prices alone would be enough to send New Mexico into an unprecedented financial downturn, crisis, etc. And if you're just talking about oil and gas, Uncle Sam is likely going to say, jump in a lake, because the policymakers, the legislature predominantly, have created economic policies over the last several decades that have made New Mexico so overly reliant on one industry. And I'll just say that the Journal's editorial, New Mexico needs a marathon strategy for this corona world, that was Sunday's editorial, also alludes to this. And what I'm really getting at is House Speaker Brian Egolf. At least he is out publicly acknowledging reality in his Saturday opinion piece, which is, we face the most significant budget deficit in state history. He doesn't even address what we're going to do about it, but he at least acknowledges it, which is really more, the governor hasn't even acknowledged this in any public specific fashion.
Yeah, in the words of the great line from Apollo 13, Houston, we have a problem. Or in this case, Santa Fe, we have a problem. We probably ought to start looking at it.
Yeah. And boy, the longer we let it go, we, as in the governor, the longer she lets this situation go without addressing, even just tightening the belt a little bit. Yes, came out publicly and said that there were going to be, some restrictions on hiring, et cetera. You shouldn't even be talking about hiring at this point. And Bernalillo County, of course, did. They said they were going to hire new people with their massive 7% increase. But uh, in a sane world, nobody is talking about hiring. Now, I will give eGolf the credit where credit is due, but I'm also going to say that Mr. eGolf has his head in the sand, so to speak, because he has a line in the piece where it basically says, nobody could ever see this possibly happening. And to an extent, yes, we would have never seen the coronavirus driven downturn that we are now going to be experiencing. But New Mexico has, more so than many other states, seen the oil boom, and we've seen the oil bust or crisis. And the fact that they jacked spending up by 21% over the last 2 years, surely we at the Rio Grande Foundation and many others knew that this was going to be a problem. It was unsustainable. I think Mr. eGolf needs to take a hard look in the mirror and understand that, yeah, we may not have seen this coming, but we could have done a better job of not overextending the size of state New Mexico government.
Yes, this is my movie quote day. In the words of the Princess Bride, inconceivable. Well, it's very conceivable. You know, in 2007, when oil prices were $140 a barrel, we heard it said, I heard it said in the media, oil prices will never be below $100 again. Well, they were. Very quickly in 2008, they were in the $50, $60 range, and things were very bad for the state of New Mexico. Because why? Because that was the great economic slowdown of that period, and oil and gas hurt us. Well, now we have a general economic slowdown, the likes of which we've not seen in my lifetime, and our most important business from a fiscal point of view, oil and gas, is beyond, hitting the skids. It's crazy what's going on. Oil prices have skyrocketed back up into what, the $12, $13 range from negative. But the point is there is a lot of pain in oil and gas. And just like we talked before, the things are related. Until economies, not only in the US and around the world, start to pick back up, oil, there's a huge glut of it. There's a glut of oil. Prices will be low. Activity is going to be very low. And because New Mexico was getting so much and continues to get so much from gross receipts tax from drilling of new wells, that will be phasing out in very short order back to very low levels. So, a lot of things are hitting New Mexico at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm throwing you a curveball here, Wally, but not to play the role of Nostradamus too much, but nobody probably has said "I told you so" to New Mexico policymakers as much as this guy right here. Yeah, I guess that's something. On January 31st, 2013, we published something, the Rio Grande Foundation. This is on Errors of Enchantment. We were doing our regulatory report looking at unnecessary and bad regulations that needed to be repealed. Now, we've talked about hoarding, and I think hoarding could be coming back because the CEO of Tyson Foods, one of the biggest meat packers in the country, was saying, we're on an edge of collapse here with the food supply. Right. So you want to see panic. Toilet paper's bad, but
chicken legs and hamburger
is a real crisis.
Absolutely.
New Mexico has a law in the books, and I'm actually not going to do a lot to publicize this because we have a law in the books as a state. It's 57-1-18, 57-1-18, that says it is unlawful in the state of New Mexico for stores to place a limit on retail purchases. In other words, if you've got 82 liters of Coke laying around for 10 cents a piece at the Sam's Club, or
And you want to buy every one of them?
and you want to buy every one
Wow.
of them, you have that right duly under the state of New Mexico's laws. And we said this is something that they should probably consider repealing 7+ years ago.
Right.
We saw how that worked. It is still on the books. And yes, stores have done, clearly, you go to any store and they try to limit you, but legally they have no right to actually do so. So there you go. In your next hoarding phase, everybody out listening out there, you too can call into question by what authority the store is limiting my purchases. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but it is what it is. I'm just telling the truth.
Yeah, I guess all I would say is if you have the right to limit my purchases, show me your badges. And then it's Tales of the Sierra Madre badges. We don't need no stinking badges. We're only going to sell you two packages of hamburger because that's all we're going to sell you.
We're going to have a new Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast drinking game. Every time Wally
mentions a movie,
pulls out a movie quote, you're going to have to take a shot. But
all right,
that might
good.
increase the listenership / viewership. But that New York Times article from our efforts on plastic bags, and we're kind of creeping up here on 30 days since Mayor Keller's released the ban on plastic bags. We'll be revisiting that one pretty soon. I suspect he will take discretion as the better part of valor and will
quietly extend
extend it. But the New York Times covered our efforts at that point, and I swear some of these websites, including this article that I'm about to reference, didn't just appear on, some Blogspot article. This was relayed on Yahoo and other well-written, well-read websites. And the article talked about how the oil and gas industry was going to be saved by the newfound use or refound uses of plastics. Of course, plastics are used in hospitals and everyday uses there.
Automobiles, consumer products, plastic bags.
Exactly.
And I know that story exists. What's the percentage of plastic bags in total plastics? Do you know that offhand? It's got to be super low in terms of the.
I don't know what plastic bags are as a percentage of plastics, but when you talk about the issue that they're so often criticized, which is being dumped into oceans and whatnot, there is not an American, or there's not a North American river in the top 10. I think it may be up to top 20 or more in terms of plastics pollution overall, let alone plastic bags. That's an issue that is often brought forth, but the reality is that the United States keeps its plastic bags out of the litter environment and out of the river system and whatnot. It's predominantly Asian and African countries. But this article, this claim that somehow that we are Rio Grande Foundation, we're pawns of the oil and gas industry, as we
propping up the oil and gas industry
by getting these bag bans repealed. And I could have done a term paper of epic proportions debunking every which way from Sunday, but I went and found a article from it's from one of the global organizations I'll come up with in a second, but they looked at the worldwide use of plastic and how much oil and gas is used for different aspects, and including plastics, chemicals, and then heating and energy and transportation.
Yeah, transportation's got to be.
As you might imagine, Wally, yes, transportation is 45% of your overall oil and gas consumption. Heating and energy, not surprisingly, is 42%. So right there, you have 87% of your overall oil and gas consumption for the two main purposes that I think everybody who owns a house and owns a vehicle would understand. Plastics in total, yes, while you would not have plastics without oil and gas, and it's the World Economic Forum. So this is not, again, a fly-by-night operation. This is posted at Airs of Enchantment along with a link to this absurd article. But oil and gas are a total 4%, or plastics are 4% of the overall use for oil and gas. And you can't save a whole lot when you boost and how many more plastics are going to be used as a result of the coronavirus? I think it's going to be a very minimal number in general. Plastics are already heavily used in healthcare and in a variety of processes that we use every day, but 4% ain't going to get it done.
No, and I would bet large dollars that plastic use overall is down tremendously. Well,
Right.
healthcare alone is really, it's on the skeleton crew of dealing with COVID and the worst of the worst emergencies and nothing else. That's a huge use. Automobiles use a lot of plastic. Consumer goods use a lot of plastic. All of those are down because of the economic downturn. And then, I'm sure plastic bags, if we were to do the chart and we had a $20,000 monitor that covered a whole wall, we might see where plastic bags are in the big percentage. But yes, I certainly don't believe that was your motivation. Correct me if I'm wrong, when you printed that, as somehow that was going to be a huge demand driver for the oil and gas industry. It was more along the lines of consumer choice, free market, etc. So,
well, we just had to connect the circle between the Koch brothers and the oil and gas industry here in New Mexico to
yes,
assert their true ownership of the Rio Grande Foundation. Sarcasm intended. And on a personal note, talking about healthcare, I would imagine you're right that because of the shutdown of so-called non-essential services in healthcare, that plastic consumption, at least at the hospitals and whatnot, is actually way down. I would imagine that plastic consumption as an economy here in the U.S. and around the world is probably down overall, just like consumption of most things. But I'll just throw this out. My mother is 75 years old and she has had both knees replaced. She has an orthopedic doctor that she would go to. She was having some swelling, some difficulty getting around because of some pain, but she couldn't just make an appointment with her orthopedic doctor. She had to actually go to an urgent care center and deal with that whole situation rather than going to the doctor that she regularly goes to, right, because he couldn't actually treat her because of this random and arbitrary shutdown of that particular aspect of our healthcare system. And yeah, I've never had that kind of knee pain, but if you've had knees replaced and you need a treatment,
or haven't had your knees replaced, and
yeah,
need treatment, yes,
those are teetering on the edge of what I would call non-essential, and it's very frustrating for her, for anybody who loves those people and wants them to see life without the kind of pain that's completely unnecessary, and yet they're dealing with that. But any thoughts or
no movie references?
Pretty straightforward. Well, we're going to talk about a movie next, and I don't know. You can choose to drink or not drink if you're playing along. You may think I'm drinking once I say what I'm going to say here. Wally, have you actually have you done as I asked to watch this movie yet?
I did not watch the whole thing, but I was intrigued by the fact that you said you largely agreed with the Michael Moore movie.
Yeah,
and so I was watching. I was watching as and listening to as I did other things, and I've made it 20 minutes into it, and in general, have found myself with almost total agreement with everything said, and probably total agreement with the big picture view of things. So,
well, I think you'll dial it back on the big picture thing, and we'll get into this.
Yeah, but I mean, to the point, I have listened to it.
Right.
Yeah. So
45 minutes or so of Michael Moore's new movie. Of course, this is the Michael Moore, and I've actually seen a vast majority of Michael Moore's various movies, everything from Roger and Me to Fahrenheit 9/11 to Bowling for Columbine. He made one about Wall Street, which I didn't think very good, but the latest movie, and it is available for free. Thank at least some socialist or principled, right? Planet of the Humans. You can find it on YouTube, or you can go right to Errors of Enchantment, and we've embedded it there. It's actually directed by a guy named Jeff Gibbs, but Michael Moore is the executive producer and the known entity on this film. And as I write at Errors of Enchantment under the post a Michael Moore film worth watching? Question mark. Uh, uh, it, the fact is that the first 45 minutes, Moore and the other gentleman really debunk so much of what we would call the, to say that they're not left wing would be idiotic, but the mainstream corporate environmental movement, the folks that gave us the Energy Transition Act here in New Mexico and so many other policies, the folks who are most politically connected, well funded, all that kind of stuff, are not helping the environment. In fact, as Moore and his co-producer here, Jeff Gibbs, note, they are actively harming the environment.
Yes, and I would not, having said the fact that I agreed with his initial points early on in the piece, I was not surprised by any of them.
No.
It's one of those that the great thing about accounting as it ties to economics is double entry. So there are pluses and minuses. There's causes and effects. There's costs and benefits, and a lot of quote unquote green energy projects, and technologies, they focused on this is what is good about it, and that's it, and nothing about the balance about what are the downsides to it. And that's no way, you make decisions like that from an economic point of view, much less an environmental economic point of view, you're probably going to get some bad results. And I do think that we've seen that in country after country around the globe, and in project after project in many places, including the U.S.
No, I'm not sure what's more fun, to go after the specific people mentioned who they dislike and disdain. It includes Bill McKibben, 350.org, which is a very extreme radical environmental group, and McKibben is a very radical fellow. Al Gore, President Obama's briefly mentioned, Arnold Schwarzenegger's in there. So it really is a takedown of some of these prominent figures. The Sierra Club plays a very big role. And this is, again, 45 minutes worth. And I'll talk a little bit about the last parts of the film and why overall Michael Moore and his producer, who makes this movie along with him, are really quite wrong. But and then they talk about some of the projects that are just total boondoggles. They talk about Vermont and putting wind turbines up on the top of mountains, and they call it hilltop removal for wind, which is an epic one line. I mean,
it really is.
Hilltop removal, of course, is in West Virginia and Kentucky, where they blow the top off a mountain for coal. And it's, hey, let's face it, it's not the prettiest thing, especially while it's happening. But, they've gone back in these places, at least in modern times, and restored and replanted and made these places look quite beautiful and lovely. You never know what's going on. Michael Moore goes through all the ingredients into solar panels, and I don't know if he used the Chino mine down near Silver Lake.
Well, I do believe there was a picture of the Chino mine, one of those. I was like, yeah that looked like the Chino to me. So.
But they have pictures and footage of third world countries and little kids and all the processes and the materials that have to go into these solar panels. It's quite amazing.
And then how long do they last? Forever. Not
so much.
Not so much.
I mean, the wind turbines, they say 20 years, which, as they rightly point out, a blink of the eye, especially given the amount of resources that go into it. They interview a guy about how many yards of cement goes into the base of a wind turbine, not to mention the actual materials in the wind turbine.
Transportation to get them
Transportation on trucks. Yeah, it is well worth watching. And the best thing is it is free. So you're not supporting Michael Moore and his quite wrong overall worldview. And, anything else you want to add on the what you've seen in the movie itself?
Well, and like I say, I call it clickbait or a teaser, whatever. A Michael Moore movie you might agree with. I had to watch it. So
there you go. Well, thank you, Wally. And it really does debunk a lot of what went into the Energy Transition Act and a lot of the environmental, so-called environmental things that we've seen. Electric vehicles. Elon Musk has a special place of quote honor in this movie. where Michael Moore goes after him and his company Tesla, and Facebook, even the Facebook facility here that was done under Governor Susana Martinez. You know, when you talk about a plant or facility being 100% renewable, what it sounds like is they snip that line to the grid, and boy, they're going to use that solar panel or that wind or battery technology, whatever it is, and they're just going to operate Facebook facility on their own. Well, the reality is far different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been one of the things that's always bugged me in terms of saying, well, we're now 100% renewable, except for the fact that we have to be connected to the overall grid or our company could never operate.
Well, and they're getting subsidized for that directly, but then they're also dumping power onto the grid at moments when they probably least need it.
Yes.
And it's being least used. And then when they actually need the coal-fired or the gas-powered plant, the solar and wind are nowhere to be found. And you wind up with all kinds of crazy quilt subsidy situations going on, and it's just a mess. And anyway, the reason, you of course can't support all of Michael Moore's agenda. What we're seeing here is actually the split between what I call Santa Claus liberals or Santa Claus
Right.
environmentalists who want to say you can live your same life, you can do everything that you basically do. We're just going to replace everything with wind and solar and unicorn farts and whatever else they put in the energy market. Which, if you really look at it, as Michael Moore did, and we have for years, it's not so green, and it's definitely not going to be cost efficient for the majority of people. However, what Michael Moore and Mr. Gibbs want, they come pretty firmly at this in the second part of the film, is we need to restrain the human population.
Yeah, no, and I could see that coming. They give
They do telegraph that a little bit.
They give a few hints. It's
Yeah.
like, so hopefully that means new people, not getting rid of all the old ones we have, but who knows? So some of these causes seem like they can get out of control.
If Michael Moore were intellectually consistent, he would say, "Go, run forth,
yes,
enjoy the virus." You do get, and that's kind of, there's been some good memes on that that kind of subject where the left has been so, let's just stay in our homes. But a lot of them, and if you scratch some of these truly radical environmentalists, you do find some anti-population folks, and it goes back to China and the one-child policy as the most extreme example. But in general, if you look at the environmental movement, it is replacing humans with a more environmental position. Like, we want to put the environment itself first. Moore just goes that extra step, which, at least in today's political environment, you've got the Santa Claus environmentalists. They think you can have your cake and eat it too. Michael Moore is at least realistically saying the technology's not, at least in its current form, going to get us there. He doesn't talk about nuclear. I'd love to see if Michael Moore could have that rational conversation about nuclear. But his point of view, that perspective of anti-human, environmentalism, I don't think it politically goes very far, and that's the ultimate problem here. Yeah. But it's so fascinating stuff. Definitely worth a free watch. I don't know that Michael Moore gets any money out of the deal one way or the other. I suppose, like in the form of YouTube views, he might get something, but it is worth checking out. And that, folks, is where we are. We are actually, one last thing. Liberty on the Rocks, as you know, as everyone who kind of follows the Rio Grande Foundation knows, especially if you're on our email list, which you can sign up for at riograndefoundation.org or arrowsoфenchantment.com, you'll know that we have regular events, mostly in Albuquerque, but we try to spread out around the state. And we've kind of been missing our Liberty on the Rocks here, where we get together at a restaurant and I talk for a little bit about what we're doing, and we have other people, including Politico types, running for office, come and they have their opportunity to say a few words about themselves and meet people and often collect signatures. That's one of the big things they can do. Uh, we've changed. We're evolving with the times. Liberty on Quarantine, the first ever edition, will be this Thursday on Zoom. If you are on our list, by all means, you will get emails to the extent that you can sign up. And it'll be a Zoom meeting, so it'll be 7 to 8 p.m. on Thursday evening. We are sitting down. I will be sitting down with candidates, starting with Republican Senate candidates, because we have a primary coming up, and I think it's very important to have a good conversation with as many of these folks as we can prior to that primary, because we went from la-di-da, so to speak, typical good economic times, everything kind of humming along. And then coronavirus hit, and suddenly nobody was able to campaign the way they traditionally have. You're not seeing door to door, maybe some ads. I haven't seen a ton of ads for any of the, at least Republican candidates, and even Ben Ray Lujan, don't recall any. But in general, outside of the Claire Chase Vet Harrell race down in the CD, you haven't seen a lot of ads. I personally am interested to hear what all of the candidates, and we'll take anybody. It's an hour investment of my time per candidate. So we're going to start with the Senate, possibly move on to congressional candidates, and we'll see where it goes. Hopefully we're out of quarantine before I get down to legislative races or whoever else is running for office. But this week, this Thursday, 7 to 8 p.m. Will be Gavin Clarkson. He's our first participant in Liberty on Quarantine. So for about 40 minutes, I will ask him questions. We'll have a conversation. Everybody will be able to listen in or watch, and then they'll get to ask their own questions using the chat feature of Zoom. And we'll go through, I'll go through some of the better questions and ask Mr. Clarkson some of his thoughts on the day. And of course, our political situation, economic situation, everything has changed dramatically since most of these folks were really out on the campaign stuff. So I think it's a fun idea. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it.
Good. All right. Well, thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.